Okay, I think we're ready to get started here. Today's presentation is on workplace violence and active shooter training, and Director of Security Services, Vincent Denota, is our presenter. So thank you all for coming, and Vincent,
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Vincent Denota. I'm the Director of Security Services. I manage all of the non-sworn members of the Rutgers Police Department for the New Brunswick campus. Security officers, CSOs, ultimately report up through me, as well as the Security Technology Division. One of the other many hats I wear is this community policing function, where I discuss and go over workplace violence and active shooter, which I have extensive experience in. Just out of a quick show of hands, how many people have had some type of exposure to this type of training in another form? A couple people. Okay, great. So more and more we're finding that more people are being exposed to this type of training, and that's really our goal, is to get to in front of as many people as possible to discuss this type of training, because it's a very different type of an emergency. It's an emergency that you really do need to have some plan of action and know some key things to help you in the unlikely event you were ever in this type of situation. So what are we going to do today? We're going to define workplace violence and active shooter, review violence as a process and mitigation strategies that can be used to help potentially mitigate the impact of the actual incident, discuss the importance of training and preparedness within the community. Like any type of emergency situation, being prepared is certainly important to be able to give the best likely outcome as we go through. Establish a survival mindset, and we'll explain how to do that. And understand what to expect from emergency responders, because again, if it's your first time going through this type of training, it may not necessarily be known what their primary response would be when they first come into the scene. So what is workplace violence? Any active threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or other threatening disruptive behavior which occurs in the workplace. Examples that we're familiar with could be verbal abuse, harassment, physical threats, physical concern. Annually, 2 million workers a year are being reported a victim of some type of workplace violence. So it's actually a very underreported statistic when you think of all the different types. But what is known about them is when you investigate workplace incidents, they're cumulative in the sense that small infractions lead to more bold concerns, which then lead to, again, more escalating behavior over the time. So it's important to understand that process, that the concept of somebody just snapping and becoming violent really is not what is seen when you investigate workplace violence crime. If we were to break down workplace violence into categories, you can think of them into 3 different categories. Type 1, which is an unaffiliated individual, so somebody who is completely unknown to the organization or the targets in which they actually inflict the violence. Typically, these people have criminal intent, so that's usually where the interaction and the violence occurs. Type 2, which is customer-patient relationships, so the interaction is caused as a result of them being, again, either a client, a patient, or a patron of some type of organization. Often results, again, through the services being provided. And then we have type 3 affiliated individuals, which are people that are known to the target or the organization. In an academic setting, that is the most prevalent, that the people are actually associated with the organization in some way. So they're either students, faculty and staff, or somehow associated with the people. It's very rare that somebody from the outside just selects a target and then moves into, from an academic perspective. We're going to break down the psychology of the individual in very simplistic ways. Thinking as a mental process, feeling as an emotional process, and then the actions in which we actually take our behaviors. And how we think, feel, and ultimately behave are influenced by both internal and external factors that press upon us all. When we think about the individual, what affects how we think, feel, and behave? Well, certainly our workplace plays a factor, our community, finances, social network or religion, health or wellness, home or family, all ultimately dictate how we think, feel, and ultimately behave. If you look at a spectrum here, we are all sliding on that scale based on those internal and external factors. One side being extremely negative, unproductive, unsafe, unhealthy, maybe a danger to oneself or others, and then the polar opposite, positive, safe, stable, and resilient. And again, every one of us are sliding on that scale based off of those internal and external factors. If we look at some personality traits that have been noted in people or problematic behavior, you can see that This has been noted in several cases of workplace violence: low self-esteem, low work productivity, low impulse control, maybe a lack of empathy. They may feel socially withdrawn, feelings of rejection, strong resistance to change. They may feel picked on or bullied, easily frustrated, challenging authority. They may have increased belligerence. They may use social media as an outlet, make specific threats, hypersensitivity to criticism, an abnormal obsession with violent events, outbursts of anger. Extreme disorganization, and clearly not in the planning for what they intend on doing, but on what they should be focused on. That's when you start to see their work performance start to decline, their social interactions start to break up. They're not focused on what they normally were focused on, they're focusing on what they intend to do at that point. Noticeable changes of behavior. We're not talking about somebody having a bad day. We're talking about dramatic changes within their personality, clearly indicating that there are some concerns with the individual or some problems going on with the individual. Homicidal or suicidal comments or threats. History of aggressive behavior. Again, social isolation or poor peer relationships. Decreasing inconsistent productivity. Signs of emotional distress. We talked about paranoia. Unstable work history. They may have fascination with weapons as well. Substance abuse. Peers are afraid. I bold and highlight that one. That was an overarching theme when they interviewed people within the working place, that people were truly afraid to be around that individual. In many cases, they would go out of their way to not be left alone with that individual because of that concern. That feeling went extremely underreported to supervisors, that people felt that strongly about that person in many cases. Changes in health or hygiene or even personality, and then chronic grievances. Now, even though I just showed you a whole laundry list of potential psychological indicators and common themes that have been noted, it's important to note just because someone displays 1, 2, or even 3 of these characteristics doesn't necessarily mean they will turn to violence. I would argue that under the right circumstance, anyone can be pushed to perform an act of violence. It just depends on what your threshold might be. For instance, you may not be a violent person, but if someone was attacking a loved one of yours, you may become violent to actually protect them. So from a risk management perspective, it's not necessarily whether somebody can become violent, it's how close they're moving to those actual actions that we need to take note of. These signs need to be reported to the appropriate authority, and the appropriate authority is a little bit of a open concept, because depending on what the concern is, it may be appropriate to report it to the police, it may be human resources, it may be student conduct. It all depends on what the concern may be. But reporting is an important point when these signs are noted. We're going to break down violence as a process, and you can think of negative situations, which could be personal, social, or political, lead to intense feelings of anger, hostility, retaliation, which then begin to create ideas in the individual that change may not be possible in a peaceful way, or they begin to actually believe that violence is justified to get their point across. Then we move into the actual planning phase, and now we'll get you guys a little bit interactive. If somebody wanted to plan an attack, an active shooter type of situation, what are some of the things you think they may do in this planning phase? Right, they're going to have to procure a weapon. If they're going to use a firearm, they have to get it somehow. If they're going to build a bomb, they have to get the materials to do so. They have to choose how they're going to do the attack. What else might they do in that planning phase? Say that again, I'm sorry. Area layouts. What are some specific things they may be looking at?
Escape routes, where the person is, how to get in, how to get out.
Right, so if there's a specific target, where are they? Entrances and exits into the building. Depending on their motivation, if they're looking for just large count of people, when are most people in? What is the schedule of the building? You mentioned security for the building. What are some things they may be looking specifically in terms of security?
Are they armed?
Is there physical security officers? Are they armed? What other security measures?
Cameras.
Are there cameras? What else? Are there any emergency protocols or procedures, access control, panic alarms, all things that they would look at? What are some of the other things they may do in that planning phase? Thing, unfortunately, about some of the news-related ones when they usually uncover. Anything come to mind? They may make threats. They may use social media as an ally. They may tell other people what they intend to do and say. It's not uncommon for them to actually document their plans, sometimes in great detail, either written or through online mediums. It's not uncommon for them to actually test emergency protocols in a facility. How could somebody test an emergency protocol at one of our facilities? get. Fake fire alarm, right? Pulling the fire alarm. Fake bomb threat, right? How do people exit the building? How do they pull together in an area? How long does it take for responders to get there? When responders come, do they arrive on scene the same way every time, or do they come different ways? All would be advantageous for anyone looking to plan an attack. It's also not uncommon for them to actually look at end-of-life planning. Sometimes they may give away items. They may actually tell others that they don't intend to harm. Don't come into work that day. Don't be here during this particular time. It's in this planning phase that we feel we have the greatest opportunity to prevent one of these incidents from occurring, because as I mentioned before, these are rarely impulsive acts, and sometimes this planning can be days, weeks, months, or even years in the making. And for people like yourselves who are intermingling with faculty, staff, and students, the likelihood of you hearing or seeing something opposed to, let's say, a public safety professional is just greater because there's more numbers. So I can't overemphasize it enough that the importance of reporting concerns. In today's day and age, if someone were to say, I'd like to come here and shoot this place up, even if it was perceived that it was a joke or in jest, that's not something you should make that determination. That's something that should be reported. Let somebody go and look at the validity of that statement to see if there's any potential intention. You would never want to be holding on to that information, and then it happens to be the time that the person is going to move forward on those actions. So when we look at the active shooter profile, if you will, again, points to take home, rarely impulsive, often people that are associated with the organization, students, faculty, or staff, usually well planned out in advance. And again, important that in many cases, people were aware that there were threats made and may not have reported them at that time. So again, threats were made, acts of violence, and they may not have actually been reported. There's another spectrum called the 5 phases of an active shooter. It's very similar to violence as a process, but the first is fantasy, where the subject begins to fantasize of whatever they feel they're going to gain from performing this act, whether it's notoriety, vengeance against an individual, vengeance against an institution. They fantasize of whatever they're going to gain by performing the act. Then they move into the planning phase, very similar to what we just talked about, determining the logistics, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Preparation, they would be procuring all the items they may need to actually perform the act. And then the approach, they will actually be typically armed at this time when they're actually on their way to the particular area. And then the implementation when they actually open fire. The FBI had put together a very comprehensive statistical report looking at active shooter incidents that occurred throughout the entire United States in a multitude of different venues. And this report was from 2000 to 2013. And some key takeaway points from that report is in the first 7 years, there was about, on average, about 6 incidents that occurred. And that actually increased to about 16 in the last 7 years. So we did see an increase in the amount of incidents that had occurred. There was 160 different active shooter incidents within that 13-year period. So a lot of times people wonder, how prevalent is this? Is it a very common occurrence? It's actually not very common when you think of all the different venue spaces and areas that occur. But nevertheless, it's very important to be prepared and aware of this type of emergency. More than half of the incidents ended on the shooter's initiative, so either by suicide or fleeing, where 21 ended in unarmed citizens actually successfully restraining the shooter. The largest percentage, almost half, took place in commercial areas, followed by educational areas, around 24%. Kind of just a visual representation of those numbers on kind of where they are and how it broke down from that particular report. They extended upon that report and went to 2017, and then we kind of show you, so from that 150 or 160 incidents, we actually increased to 250 incidents from that entire 17-year period. As a result, a little over 2,200 were either casualties or killed during the actual event. You have actually 799 were actually killed total, and then the rest were injured when you break down the numbers of people who were impacted by those incidents. When you look at the kind of the graph of per year, how it went, you did see that increase as you went through, and you're probably looking at an average somewhere around 17 incidents per year. But again, you saw in the last couple of them, we're hovering around that between 20 and 30 mark across the country. Where has it occurred? The statistics pretty much showed similar, that commerce was one of the biggest areas where they had the concern. Education was the next biggest bucket. If you subcategorize that from K through 12 and then higher education, it was much more prevalent in K through 12 than in higher education. So I think we had about 15% was in K through 12 and roughly 6% in higher education. Other open space, government, other areas to be noted, healthcare facilities, which certainly we have some very low number, surprisingly, as you look at, although violence in general can be seen to be a little bit higher in those particular areas, not necessarily with firearms in those particular areas. Places of worship, 4%, residents, 4.8%. When you look at the most impactful ones that have occurred, and these are just a snapshot of some of the most, the worst deadliest shootings in the country during that period, what you notice is you see a concert, a nightclub, a college campus, an elementary school, and a church. So what that really should tell you, though, is that the impact, there isn't a specific target or specific area that is, even though it may happen more in other areas, impact-wise, it really goes the entire gamut in terms of where it could occur and what impact it could have on particular areas. So what can institutions and people do to mitigate this type of threat? Well, the first step is ensuring that you have proper policy development dealing with workplace violence. What is the benefit of having a policy that dictates how we have to behave within the workplace? Why is that important to have a policy that explains that? Shouldn't that just be innate and known that we need to, not be angry and throw things or lash out at people? Why do we have to have a policy that dictates? What's the power of a policy? Holds people accountable. How?
Well, if you have something in place that people are supposed to follow, when they go off that script, now you have a recourse for reprimand or discussion or whatever else.
Absolutely.
There's no policy.
Absolutely.
They don't have a leg to stand on.
You can keep everybody on a level playing field by explaining the rules, because it may not be known by everyone what is the acceptable behavior. So it's important to lay that groundwork, but it also allows the administration to act when people fail to follow that. So that's an important, without having that policy, it may be difficult, because if you notice back to some of those early warning indicators and concerns, a lot of those concerns may not be something that public safety or law enforcement can actually deal with. If it's not a crime that has occurred, they may not be able to actually assist to help mitigate the concern. So some of those things may have to be dealt with by other departments in other areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Background checks, ensuring background screening is just a good overall security measure in general in today's day and age as you're going through. Develop threat assessment teams. What is a threat assessment team? You could say a team that assesses threat. I get that every time. Threat assessment team, in the context of what we're talking about, what is the threat assessment team doing?
So maybe you can figure out exactly what is the threat, what a potential threat is. So if you access that, if a person does that, that's not a potential one, but this one is. So maybe you identifying what type of threat is really.
And how would they identify these threats? How would they be getting that information?
People have to report it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Based on reporting.
Right, a lot of times people get threat assessment teams confused with security assessment or risk assessments, which are thinking abstractly about potential concerns. Threat assessment teams are actually dealing with what is actually happening. So you can think of a threat assessment team as the clearinghouse for all those early warning indicators. So people are reporting these concerns into a group of people, and then they're saying, what is the most appropriate action based on the concerns that we're getting? What type of departments would you want represented on a threat assessment team, let's say in the university? When you think of all our little buckets of departments, who should be represented on a threat assessment team? Human resources, we need them. Who else? Public, number 2, I'm glad we made it on the list. That's good. That's good. Sometimes we get left off, believe it or not. Yes, public safety, human resources, who else? Probably need to bring legal to the team, right? They probably need to be.
Space management.
Could be, you said space management, risk management, could be some type of administrative piece, could be deans, administration, whatever it may be. Probably need mental health professionals, right? Certainly would be valuable on the team. The point is it's a multidisciplined team that brings a lot of different expertise to the table to help mitigate these type of concerns because again, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a situation that only public safety would be able to deal with. They need the expertise and the resources of all the different departments to help mitigate small concerns before they get to the most extreme that we're talking about here. Environment of assistance, providing assistance and create a positive environment. Very important to be able to provide employees and faculty, staff, and students opportunities that when they are struggling, when there are concerns, that there are outlets for them, that there are ways to get them help before they believe that there is no concern at that. And that could be through mental health services, student counseling, human resources programs, anything that can help people as they're going through problems while they are here. Training and emergency preparedness, ensure training are done by general population as well as our emergency responders. Strong security programs, procedural and physical. Why is that important in an academic setting? Why do we need to have our own embedded police service at the college here, and we have ID badges and alarms and cameras? What is the benefit of having it? Couldn't you just argue that the surrounding police agencies in the township could provide effective policing services to the university? Response time is often cited, right? Having them in better resources indicate that we may be able to get there faster. But is that the only value? Presence could be a deterrent, right?
Familiarity with the space.
Absolutely. Familiarity with the space is probably the most important thing. The reality is, one could certainly argue that the surrounding police agencies could provide effective policing, but what they would never be able to understand is what makes Rutgers Rutgers, how complex we actually are. The student population, the research and development, the housing areas, the academic areas. That's why we are well placed in there, is because we do understand those elements and what makes it so confusing and makes it so complex. So that's an important element to be able to look at and why it's so important to have it. Schools in general, you probably have heard the term, are soft targets. And unfortunately, they have to be in certain circumstances because we would never be able to employ all the security measures, let's say, we would maybe want, because it would be prohibited to actually have operations. Could you imagine if we expected 400 students to swipe into a lecture hall every time they had class? We would never be able to function. However, there are areas within the university that need to have reasonable security measures, residence halls, medical facilities, research areas that people from the street should not be able just to get to these assets without having some checks and balances. And this goes well beyond just the workplace violence active shooter, just from a overall crime prevention standpoint. If everyone does their part to subscribe to the importance of the security protocols, follow those protocols, don't prop doors open, don't share badges, follow whatever security protocol exists within your particular area, we can help mitigate a whole host of concerns from a small theft to a most extreme case, like a case of violence like we're talking about. So what has Rutgers done specifically? Well, we have a workplace violence policy, which I reference here. Background checks was something that was instituted also by the university. We have a policy now dictating that all background checks have to be done by new employees. Threat assessment teams. We actually have 2 threat assessment teams in the university. One that deals exclusively with faculty and staff, and the other that deals with students. So they separate the work streams, but many of those same groups that I told you about are represented on those teams. And while it certainly isn't a catch-all, it has prevented things from occurring in the university, things that people aren't even aware of. And again, it's because people like yourselves have reported concerns into these groups to be able to help mitigate these concerns. Environment of assistance, UHR, mental health services are widely available throughout the university. There's a lot of different programs to provide services and to help people who may be suffering or may be having concerns, to help probably mitigate these things before they become more concerning. Training and emergency preparedness, emergency action plans are developed by our Public Safety Division and our Office of Emergency Management. We also have education and drills similar to this one. I will actually show you a clip at the end of the presentation of one of those drills, and that is really the best type of training that we can actually provide. While I feel this training is certainly beneficial from an academic perspective, the best type of training is actually to participate in a simulation, an actual live scale drill. And you will find that things about yourself on whether you're able to actually deal with an emergency, perceive a threat, and react accordingly. Or maybe you find that you freeze in those emergencies. And we would hope that we would be able to overcome that by providing you with that training. And again, I'll show you that towards the end of the presentation. Strong security programs, we have people that come out and do security assessments. So somebody like myself could come out to a space and look at your policies, your procedures, and your technology and offer recommendations on how to secure the facility better than what you're currently using. So how could you help as an individual? Well, develop relationships among your students and employees and faculty and staff. Make sure people are aware on how to report suspicious behavior and concerns, whether that's even the catch-all could be dialing it to the police department on the non-emergency line if you didn't know where else to go with it. Following security protocols and procedures. Make sure that you, for any emergency concern, 911 is always the number, and we'll talk a little bit about when you actually have to dial that. For non-emergency numbers, everyone in this room, depending on what campus you're primarily working, should have these numbers programmed into your phone. What do you use them for? Could be a question, could be reporting something suspicious, could be asking for a security escort. You know, these are very important numbers to know. Share a concern website, certainly you should be aware of that, as well as the Rutgers Compliance Hotline, which again, reports can be anonymous. Does it work? Does the reporting work? I can tell you that it does work. The Police Foundation did a study on specifically in school-related concerns that in 2018 alone, 51 incidents were averted as a result of people reporting concerns in. So you thought about that 250 incidents that occurred in that 17-year period, 51 more could have been added to that list in that 1 year alone had it not been for people reporting the concerns. Did it come from the security or the police that were stationed there? Not primarily. Peers were the ones that reported it the most. So again, that overarching theme of making sure you're reporting the concerns into people. So that's the proactive, that's the preventative. Now we're going to talk about the reactive, that if the emergency were to occur, what are some options to consider? And the harsh reality is if anyone ever stands up here and says, if X happens, you do Y, you'll be completely safe, they're lying to you. No one should make that claim. It would be irresponsible to do so. Every person in this room could think up a scenario and add variables that may have to change the way you would actually react in this type of emergency. What is common among those people that have survived this type of incident is that they used one of these three options in their most simplistic terms, run, hide, fight method. And we're going to explore each one as we go through. You need to be physically and mentally prepared to act, which goes into that developing that survival mindset. You should be aware of the emergency action plans that exist for the university, general fire evacuation plans, where do people muster, where do you go, what plans exist within your particular facilities. And again, you certainly want to be aware of these three options. The run, hide, fight is pretty much one of the standards that are out there. It's been rebranded or renamed different things, but at its essence, this is the best process or the best way to deal with this type of concern. So certainly, if you have the ability to get away from the emergency, that would probably be one of your best options. If you had the three options in front of you, if you can get away from it, we're encouraging you to do that. You need to be able to identify where the threat is and put as much distance between you and that threat as possible. You need to know your environment better than everybody else. How many people, when you go to a venue space for the first time, you immediately seek out emergency exits? A couple of people do. If it's not something you do, I encourage you to do that. Next time you go out to the mall, to the movies, just take a quick look and scan the room. See how to get out of that space. You don't want to be looking to get out of a space when you need to go. You want to know how to get out of that space ahead of time. Having a good understanding of your environment will give you a lot of benefits in this type of emergency because you may know that the quickest exit is out the door to the left and we're outside because that's what I use in a fire. But depending on where the emergency is, you may need to retreat further into a building. You may need to go a long way depending on where the danger actually is. So really having a good sense of the building layout, where to go, where you can get out, will help you in this type of situation. As faculty and staff, again, people may look to you to give them advice to leave. If you can encourage people to get out and leave, you're encouraged to do that. Does that mean as danger is imminent, you should have a lengthy conversation with somebody and while it's time to leave if they're not moving? Of course not. You have to protect yourself and go. However, if you can encourage other people to go, you want to do that. Leave your belongings behind and head out. We actually see this a lot in fire emergencies. People going back to their offices for their coats because we're going to be outside. Do I really have to end this phone call now? The alarm is it's a real fire. Obviously, you want to move with speed to get out of the area. You want to make yourself a difficult target. If danger is imminent, the worst thing you can do is stand up big and straight and run in a nice straight line for the shooter, because the shooter then will make you an easier target. So in the way of getting out, you want to make yourself small. You want to be able to dart in and out. Try not to be so linear when you're running through that particular area. That will be the best way while danger is imminent, so the shooter doesn't have to look at you for an easier target. Speed is key. You want to get as away from the danger as quickly as possible. You want to inform other people of the emergency when you get into other areas. If you've made it to another building, simply informing other people that there's an emergency in that building and not to go there is the single best source of information that you can provide. We have other mechanisms of reporting it, text message alerts, emails. Everything is slow. The best source of information is going to be the people on the ground level, because that's going to give people that are directly in danger the information that they're going to need. So certainly if people decide to go in that area anyway, you've done your part to at least inform them that there was danger there not to go that way. And that may actually prevent people from stumbling upon or entering the emergency who are not aware of it. Call 911 when you are safe, and we'll explore more specific on what to do as we go on. Large rooms and auditoriums, the most important thing to know is how to get out of that space. You have a lot of space to traverse, a lot of people to contend with, so really knowing how to get out of that space is extremely important. You want to, again, know where those exits are in the particular area, and you want to avoid the herding effect at doorways. What's the herding effect?
Bunches up.
Right. So these doors are a little bit more forgiving because they're larger, but if we look at the doors in the back, if we used one side as a regular door, how many of us could fit through that one side at one time? Maybe two, depending. If we all got up at the same time and ran towards that exit, what's going to happen? We're going to smash into each other. We may block up the exit. Now nobody gets out. That's why they tell you to walk in a fire, not run, because people panic. They run towards the exit and create more of a hazard. You certainly need to move with speed, but you want to make sure that your movements are not going to create more of a hazard for yourself or others in your attempt to escape, because you may end up trapping yourself and others as you're trying to evacuate the area. If you can't run away from it, hiding may be another option for you. You want to go to an area where the shooter is less likely to find you. If you have the ability to lock or barricade yourself in that area, you want to do that. Try not to draw attention to yourself within that area, muting your cell phone, turning off lights, drawing shades. If you are with a group, it's actually better to spread out in there, not stay concentrated, stay low and away from the line of fire. So you don't want to lie just against a wall up straight. You want to actually get low. If you dial 911 and you feel by talking to the 911 dispatcher you will be giving away your position, simply leave the line open. The 911 dispatcher are trained to listen to the background noise, and they will attempt to trace the call without you giving the actual location of where you are. You need to understand the difference between cover and concealment. Cover is something that may give you some physical protection from gunfire, so materials that may stop a bullet from going through. Whereas concealment may provide you no physical protection, but simply hide you in a particular area. And depending on where you are, whether you're outside, inside a building, what do you have time to get down, underneath, or behind, given the situation? You have to think of those materials, and obviously if you have something that provides you both cover and concealment, that's the most preferable. After locking or barricading a door, you want to remain, again, hidden, out of sight, staying out of line of sight. Imagine this just being a visual representation, people along the wall, the shooter comes through, checks the door, and then moves on. The shooter understands that once they start shooting, somebody's going to call the police, and the clock starts for them. If they come upon a room that appears to be empty, they may not waste the time to shoot through that door or break that door down on the attempt that maybe somebody's on the other side. Most of the studies shown they are looking for targets of opportunity at that point because they know they have a finite time. Unless they believe the target is in that room, they're not going to waste the time to break through that door or search every little nook and cranny that they have because they know they're on the clock. And we actually saw this in actual practice when we do our live drills, that people were amazed at where they can actually hide, and the shooter just didn't see them. On top of toilet seats, behind curtains, in bookcases, underneath desks in certain areas. Some people lie down and simulated being shot, and the shooter just walked past them. All different mechanisms in terms of that hiding aspect. So I know some of you were at the training before and you had this question posed, but I'll ask it again. Should you pull a fire alarm in an active shooter situation? What do you think? You say yes? You say no. Okay, so we got the answers we needed on both sides. So for my yes, why do you think we should?
It'll alert people to come and help.
Okay.
The fire department, the police,
So it's going to alert responders. And now let's go to the people who say you don't think you should pull the fire alarm. What happens when a fire alarm is pulled, right? Everyone scrambles. So unfortunately, while there is a benefit, there's more harm that can be done. Why? You should not pull a fire alarm in an active shooter situation. One, it creates confusion regarding the emergency. As you mentioned, when that fire alarm goes off, we've been trained since we were little, it goes off, we walk out in a certain way, we pull in a nice big group outside, certainly would be advantageous for the shooter. That's one concern. The second may lead individuals right into the line of fire. As you mentioned, again, they're evacuating a specific way. It's going to be a concern. Sensory deprivation. What's happening when the alarm is going off? Horns and strobes are going off. People are going on. You may not hear where gunfire is coming from or where people are running from. So everyone will be at a disadvantage in that particular area. And while you will get an emergency response, you may get the incorrect emergency response because fire department may arrive first. And if they arrive first and walk into that scene, they're not going to be very valuable in that type of situation. So overall, you should not. The benefits do not outweigh the harm that's there. So here's a scenario for you. You're in a building, and you get a text alert that there's an active shooter situation in and around the area you're working, but you don't see or hear anything that confirms that that's true. Shortly after the fire alarm goes off in the building, what do you do?
Go with caution.
Are you staying or are you going? You're staying. What if there's a fire? Leave with caution. So this is a little bit of a trick question because there is no definitive answer, but you got to use your brain, right? You have to be able to think about it. You just received information there may be one emergency, and now have conflicting information. So again, do you see smoke or smell see smoke? Do you smell smoke? Do you see fire? Some people have argued, call 911, ask them. I have both information. Can you confirm either? But you wouldn't want to just blindly leave because certainly that could be a concern. Did somebody panic and pull the fire alarm? Did the shooter pull the fire alarm to try to draw people out of the particular area? All things you have to be considering and thinking about in this type of emergency. Unfamiliar voices could be an attempt for the shooter to lure people from their actual areas. I'm sure we're all familiar with the tragic events that occurred at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And you may recall the story of the teacher that locked herself in the bathroom with the students while the emergency was occurring. When the scene was over, the police were going through systematically unlocking all the areas. They came upon the bathroom door, they knocked on the door, said, "Police, open up." And she responded, "If you're the police, you'll have the key and you'll be able to get in." On the one hand, I'll say she probably shouldn't have announced she was on the other side of the door because she just gave away her hiding spot. However, she wasn't comfortable just opening the door just because someone claimed to be the police. And that's perfectly acceptable. You should not feel obligated to unbarricade or unlock yourself unless you are absolutely positive the people on the other side are emergency responders. So again, if that ever occurs, you're going to stay put, and the police will systematically unlock all the doors and go through to get people out of their hiding spots. So again, be prepared of that. Safe rooms. I get this question a lot. Where are the safe rooms in the university? There are no true safe rooms in the university because a true safe room you have to build from its inception with everything you would want in a safe room. And we don't construct buildings to have safe rooms in every single building that we have. There are rooms that are better than others that you can consider, and these are things you can think about. Is the room easy to locate? How many entry points does it have? Can you lock the door? Are there objects in the room that you can barricade the door? Is there secondary means of egress? Are there objects in the room that provide you cover? Is there communication equipment within the room that alert people that you may be there? Would all be ideal areas to hide in your particular area. And given your work environments, you have to look at those. Do you have areas that check off some of these boxes in that type of emergency? Fight. As a last ditch effort, when you can't get away from it and you can't hide from it, you may need to fight. What's important to note about this is if you decide to fight, you need to be fully committed to the actions you're about to take because you may only get one opportunity to do that. And we say you fight until you can't fight anymore. There was a school board shooting in Panama City, Florida in 2010 by a gentleman by the name of Clay Allen Duke came into the building and he had a handgun in one hand and a spray can in the other. And he spray painted a big anarchy symbol on the wall and he told everybody in the audience to get out and he held the board members hostage. The backstory is his wife had worked for the school board and was let go a few weeks earlier, and he felt they were directly responsible, so he was going to make sure he was going to be heard. While he was conversing with them, a woman came back into the room and tried to disarm Clay Allen Duke by swinging her pocketbook to knock the gun out of his hand. Clay Allen Duke was about this big, woman was about this big, came behind, one swing of the pocketbook. It was unsuccessful. He grabbed her, threw her to the ground, could have easily shot her, called her a derogatory name, and then tossed her away. My purpose for mentioning her is that she should have never put herself in that situation. She was taking a great risk with her life. That's not what we're talking about when we say fight or take action. She wasn't in a desperate situation. She put herself back into the emergency situation. The reality is she was trying to be a hero. However, it's not like the movies. You hit the person in the hand with the gun one time, it flies out of the hand, you save the day. She took a great risk with her life doing that. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying when you have to fight, you're fighting because you have no other options. Act aggressively. If you have a group together, improvise weapons. Use whatever is necessary, whatever you have at your disposal at that point to defend yourself. You need to be committing to the actions you're about to take, again, as I mentioned. Remember, again, this should be utilized as a last resort. And again, you should be basically fighting until there is no longer a threat at that particular time. 911. When you call 911, depending on whatever time, whether you're in the running phase, hiding, whether you're even fighting and somebody dials 911, these are some key things you need to remember to talk to the 911 dispatcher about. The shooter's location, number of suspects, if their identities are known, any description, physical, gender, types of weapons used, your location and the number of people, and those that are injured. Do not assume that somebody else has reported the incident. Even in your mind, if you think enough time has passed, somebody must have dialed 911 at this point. When you have the opportunity, we want multiple calls going into 911 regarding this type of emergency. The other important thing I'll hammer home is really the location. Again, if I called 911 right now and I said there's a shooter at the student center, would that be very valuable? No, which one? Student at the library, which one? The rec center, which one? All right, so we're very complex here. Even acronyms that we use, they're at the CINJ, they're at the CAB, the ME, we know what we're talking about, but you want to be extremely specific. Some of these buildings are also very large and complex, so if you have specific, the first floor of this building, the more pertinent information you can give to that 911 dispatcher, the better they can get responders to that particular area. When law enforcement arrive, what should you do? Follow the officer's instructions. Put down any items you have in your hands. Immediately raise and spread your fingers. Keep your hands visible at all times. Avoid making quick movements towards those officers. Why are we telling you to do this? Right, the law enforcement responders may have limited information in the situation. You don't want to be perceived as a threat to them when they're arriving. So you want to do everything in your power to show them that you're not a threat. In the last shooting in Florida, again, the suspect actually tried to do that by putting down the gun and raising a hand and tried to evacuate out with the other students. And he was immediately ostracized by everybody that was the shooter. Or even some of the shooters are aware of this training and are trying to use it to their advantage as they go through. Don't ask the officers where to go, just go in the direction that they're coming. If you're going this way, you're going this way. You'll see where they are bringing people together in an assembly point. There normally will be an area where they have deemed safe and they'll have people in that particular area. Know that help is on the way for the injured. Understand that officers, many different types of officers will respond to this type of emergency if it were to occur, let's say, on campus here. I'll use the New Brunswick campus as an example. We are fortunate in the sense that we have a lot of law enforcement agencies very close in our area. Aside from just the Rutgers Police Department, you would have New Brunswick, Piscataway, Middlesex County Sheriff's Department. All these departments are very close and would be sending officers to this type of emergency. They may be in different attire. They may not be in the normal uniforms, but they will all be identifiable via their badge because they don't want to be perceived as a threat. So they're going to be self-identifying everywhere to ensure that they're not perceived as a threat by other responding officers as they come through. Understand that their primary goal is to find the shooter and stop the shooter. Tending to people that are injured is a secondary. And that's a surprise for a lot of people that are not aware of that, because you assume that if somebody is injured, they're going to help that person when the officer arrives. They will literally step over those people to go towards the shooter to help prevent further loss of life. There have been lessons learned, and I think every time this occurs somewhere in the country, it's an opportunity for emergency managers to really look and see what has worked from a responsive way and be able to kind of tweak that, the response efforts. For instance, the Florida nightclub shooting started out as an active shooter, but then actually transitioned into a hostage situation, and then they realized that they couldn't get at the person. People that were injured were not receiving medical attention. So they've actually talked about having EMTs brought in by actual police for security to extract people that are actually injured. Still won't be the first group in, but maybe the second or third wave, and it's ways that emergency managers have looked at modifying some of the response that has occurred. But again, still their primary threat is to eliminate the threat first when they first arrive on scene. Once you've reached a safe assembly point, we ask that you stay there. If everyone just got in their cars and drove home, it would just be harder to account for everyone that's there. The reality is you're going to know who you were at work with, you know who was in your building, and that information will be very valuable to the responders when the scene is secure. Again, that head count aspect is really important. Try to avoid posting things through social media. I know a lot of people nowadays, they want to get information out immediately. A lot of times in their attempt to get it out, it's actually false information and actually causes more harm than good. Preparedness. Ultimately, what are you doing? You're reporting concerns, developing a survival mindset, review emergency action plans, sign up for text message emergency notification if you haven't already. Be aware that we have other online resources that echo this type of training, and something that you definitely should be perusing and going through. Now I'm going to show you a quick video which sums up the reactive elements of the plan. It is in a school setting, but understand that the principles can be utilized anywhere.
To be prepared to act, just like you would in a fire. Every second counts. Not sure if that's gunfire? What else is happening? Check for crowd reactions, shouts, screams. your environment. Knowing your options ahead of time means you can act with a clear mind when fear and adrenaline kick in. Scan and assess your situation. Consider your options. Act. Active shooter situations are unpredictable and evolve quickly. You will need to react fast. If you believe you can escape safely, do so immediately. When you are safe, call 911.
There's a shooter on campus.
People coming out. Where's the shooter?
I think he's in the library.
Okay, get behind her truck.
Follow the directions of police. Choose a safe exit. Don't attract the shooter's attention. Protect yourself first before helping others. Find a secure room or space.
Shut the lights.
Turn off the lights. Cover windows.
Get out of the line of fire.
Lock the door and barricade it if you can.
Someone's shooting. We're gonna walk down. We're gonna be safe. Don't worry.
Improvise. Stay out of the line of fire. Get under desks or behind tables. Mute your phone. Be quiet. Wait for police to come to you.
Hey, Russ, what's your voice?
Turn off the lights. Lock and barricade doors. Stay out of the line of fire. Be quiet.
Please remember, we are not going to be in this.
When you can't get out or hide, your last resort may be to fight.
You turn off the lights.
Quick, get under the desk, everyone.
Whether you are alone or with a group, be ready to fight for your life. Commit to aggressive action. Mentally prepare yourself to physically fight. It would be a fight for your life. It's your decision. Disarm and incapacitate the shooter any way you can.
Keep him down.
Improvise weapons from nearby objects. Commit to an aggressive physical attack. Stop the threat. If you are safe in your hiding place, stay there and let police come to you.
It's the police service. Announce your presence.
Remember, the primary duty of police is to stop the shooter and then tend to casualties.
What we need you to do now is just follow our direction. Everything's gonna be okay. We're gonna get you to exit the room, nice and slowly, one at a time with your hands.
Do whatever you can to get through this. Odds are you will never face the unthinkable. But if you do, keep the odds in your favor.
Okay, be nice.
Planning can save your life. Having options empowers you and helps control your fear. Be familiar with your environment. Assess your situation. Make a decision and act. Get out, hide, fight.
You're okay. You're all okay.
So as you can see, the video does a really good job summing up the reactive elements of the plan. The next video I'm going to show you is that clip of one of the training exercises that we provide. Now, some of you may have seen it when we had the brief overview of this in the last leadership meeting, but it's good to go through it, and I want to give you guys just the preface of what you're going to see. So this was the simulation of drill. Everybody who participated in the drill knew that they were participating in an active shooter drill. What they didn't know is what the shooter looked like, whether the shooter was going to be in the building or outside the building to start, and exactly what time it was going to occur. So there was many variables that were put in there to add to the realism of the event. As I mentioned, the community service officers report to me, which are our student arm. Many of them did play some pre-described roles in the ones. They will simulate being shot, screaming, adding to the realism of the event, so just be forewarned about that. You will also see on the periphery people wearing vests that are not reacting to the situation, and that's because they're just observers. That's why they're not running or doing anything, so we allow people to be observers as well. I want you to watch the video, and then we'll kind of analyze a little bit of what you saw. And this takes place in Alexander Library on the New Brunswick campus. Seeing everything from the shooter's perspective on the camera. So this was one of our earliest training exercises that we had done. And the point of watching these videos are not necessarily to look at it and say you should have ran this way and did this. I mean, it's a lot easier for us to do that and say that versus actually participating. But there is several things that we can point out, having the hindsight to look at the video on some of the choices some people made. But my first question for you, and if you were in the previous one, don't answer this, but how long do you think that was by the time when the shooter started shooting in the lobby to when the police intercepted them? What's a guess? 3 minutes. What was that? 4 minutes?
Minute and a half. Yeah.
Minute and a half?
45 seconds.
45 seconds? So it was actually 2 minutes. We clocked it at 2 minutes on there. And 2 minutes from a police response time is really good. That's a good response time. The reality is it could be quicker, it could be shorter. It all depends on where the officers happen to be. If there's an officer right outside this building right now and something occurs, they're going to be in here in under a minute. If they're all at headquarters on 55 Paul Roberson Boulevard, they will not make it here if it's 5 o'clock and Route 18 is a parking lot. And maybe even with lights and sirens, it's going to take longer time. So 2 minutes was a good metric for us to put. The officers responding, by the way, also did not have preconceived notion of who the shooter was and where they were. So if you know that library, you know that the shooter, when the officer came in, they could have went straight, left, right, down, or in a lot of different ways. Easily could have went the wrong way. He happened to choose the right way and get to the shooter quicker, but he could have easily went a different way into the building. Now let's explore some of the choices or some things that maybe you found odd that some of the people were doing. Can we identify any of those things, given some of the training that you've noticed that was probably not the best thing to do?
Someone yelled out, "I've been shot," or "I've been hit."
I've been shot or hit. Obviously, if you were really shot, we would hope that you would not be able to draw attention to yourself. You're encouraged not to draw attention to yourself, because certainly by saying you're hit is going to draw attention to the shooter, to you. What else?
That's what I was gonna say.
Yep.
It looked like it was 3 people in one open area, right, underneath the thing.
There was quite a few people.
Like you just opened
Right.
together, and it was open, wasn't barricaded or anything.
Right.
One
right.
guy was standing straight up
Right.
in the middle.
Somebody got up
and-
straight ahead. They ran straight ahead as the shooter. It was easy for them to. Some people tried to move when he was trying to reload at that point, but again, made themselves easy targets as they ran through. That one group of students in the back took the table and flipped it over and hid behind it. The shooter just walked around it and found it because it wasn't really giving them any protection at that time. Let's talk about the students that were in the lobby at the beginning. Did they have a chance?
No.
No. And that's a harsh reality, but a reality none the same, that if somebody walks up to a group of people with a concealed weapon and pulls it out and fires, we can only hope 3 things. They miss, the gun malfunctions, or the people can react fast enough to what happened. That's it. Police officers are ambushed and killed, and these are trained professionals with firearms that are supposed to have situational awareness at all times. So to think that it can't happen to the general population is a fallacy. There are certainly things you can do to help increase your chances. Someone's approaching a building with a firearm, you see it, you report it, you act, you move fast, but some situations are outside of people's control. Another thing that was interesting about this particular group is the students that were in the back area, none of them moved or did anything until he traversed those doors. So shots were fired in the lobby, shots were fired by the circulation desk, and it wasn't until he opened that door, that's when they got up and they started to run. If you know that room, you'll know there's an emergency exit right behind them that actually had one of those alarms up that would tell them not to go through because it makes the noise. Had they had a little bit more situational awareness of what was going on and they reacted immediately, maybe half of that group would have been outside of the building and down College Avenue during that time. So if nothing more, it should tell you how fast you need to be able to perceive a threat and react in that situation. How you react, whether you're running, hiding, or fighting, is all situational based on where it is and where the threat happens to be. But fantastic training opportunities. If you ever have the ability to partake in one of them, even as an observer, I strongly encourage you to do that. Any administrators in the room, if you're looking to donate your building or area for us, we're always looking for new places to train. Every time we do this, we learn something special about the building. We've done many of these now throughout all New Brunswick, Newark, and Camden. And we learn things from a responsive perspective. For instance, at the business school, who would imagine that you would be able to hear a firearm fired at the lobby on the 5th floor because of the open architecture? Yet we've done training in facilities where the office is soundproof and you couldn't hear shots in the next office. So these are things you just learn about the different facilities that are there. So it's always valuable. You saw in the video some ingenious ways of locking door closures, utilizing it. And there were many things that people did in these type of training as well. Somebody had an office that didn't have a traditional lock on it with just a normal lever handle. They took a bookcase and slid it right underneath, essentially securing the door. Taking a door chock and jamming it into the other side of the door, where now it creates a barricade. One person hid in a bookcase here, actually so successfully that we had to let them out. They were trapped. But again, it allows you to actually simulate in the most realistic environment that we can provide. Should any of you be interested in having this training brought to more smaller groups or other colleagues that are there are a lot of different ways to seek training opportunities. And also, if you're looking at doing maybe a drill or something more specific, you can feel free to reach out to the contacts that we have here. Certainly at the end, if anyone has any questions, you can let me know. Any questions regarding the training itself or anything I can answer in general about public safety while I am here?
I have a question.
Yes.
Cubicle land. Most of us sit in cubes.
Yes.
No way to hide because you're just.
It's difficult to hide. Yes.
Well, yeah, you could probably
Yes.
sit in that little closet.
I always look at that thing.
Yes. So,
But
and that,
even if you're under your desk, it's open.
Correct.
You have.
If he's gonna shoot.
and that's why when we talk about using these options, thinking of all the environments that we have here, there is no cookie cutter answer. I've done this training in buildings before where it's all glass. Tell them to hide in a glass building or have some physical protection. It's difficult to be able to, sometimes your only option may be to try to evacuate or fight in that circumstance. When we think of all the different, most new buildings or architecture, it's open concept and open areas. It's not really lend itself too well from a security measure in that respect. So unfortunately, there's no easy answer on those type of ones on what to do. Other questions? Okay, if anybody didn't have any questions, I'll certainly stay after. The last thing I like to leave all my presentations with on this is that it's fantastic you took the time to come and actually listen to this and gain it. I hope you gained something from it. But this type of training is something you really need to take outside of work with you. Because as I showed you with some of the statistics, I really challenge you to think of any public venue space or private that has not dealt with an active shooter type of situation. Malls, places of worship, movie theaters, military bases, hospitals, businesses, concerts, the list goes on and on. So while it is extremely uncommon that it would occur, it's important that you are prepared that in the unlikely event something occurs, you're able to remember some of the things that we talked about today, because it may end up actually saving your life and the life of the people that are there. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent.